Hey guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Dr. Eduardo De Souza, and he is currently a tenured professor at the University of Tampa. He is a co-author on the recent NS paper, the famous 52 sets of quads paper that I recently had Brad, Milo, and Pac on to dissect. And obviously that looked at various volume amounts for hypertrophy on the quads. Now, Eduardo reached out to me as he was interested in expressing his take on the paper and his take on kind of the literature as a whole as it pertains to training volume, because he has also worked and is working on several papers looking at the relationship between volume and hypertrophy and strength. So today we are going to discuss things more broadly and look to understand the caveats in training volume research for strength, hypertrophy, before diving into some practical recommendations. And guys, I think this is going to be a really great chat, or rather, I've already recorded it. It was a really great chat where we really dig into those caveats. And I think this just gives you a broader understanding of when you are seeing this research, whether or not you're digging into the paper itself, you're reading a research review, you're listening to a podcast, or do you just see something on social media, how to take that and move forward with it. How does that inform your coaching or your personal practice to your own training? And guys, as always, it's highly appreciated if you give us likes, comments, subscribes, ratings, reviews. If you can do that on whichever platform you're on listening to this podcast, it's highly appreciated. That's how we grow, especially for people like Eduardo, who this is his first time on the show. So if you can share this around on social media, tag me, tag him, it's going to help more people get more awareness. And I think it's just greater for everyone in terms of that education within muscle hypertrophy. But guys, without further ado, let's get into the chat. Eduardo, we are here today to discuss the caveats in training volume research for strength and hypertrophy. And the first thing I wanted to ask you was why you thought that is an important topic to cover.
Well, that's, first of all, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. And I like to say that we all have a biases, and because we work with different studies or products. In my case, I'm a researcher studying training volume for a while, but I like to say I don't have any conflict of interest when it comes to what I'm going to say here in the show. I don't sell products related to volume, ebook, Bibles, whatever. I don't sell any product related to my research. So what I'm going to share with you is my opinion about the research and how it can help people to get stronger or bigger, for example. That's what I'm really interested to at this point. So I think it's important because social media plays a very important role disseminating information, and sometimes people get confused about how to use information or just one part of a study. We have the culture of the last study, right? Once the last study is published, we should do that based on social media sometimes. Oh, that's the new finding. Forget what you're doing and start doing that. And I think when it comes to the caveats is understand where a data is applicable and how a paper alone does not carry the weight to change practical application, decision make for athletes, coaches. I think it's really important to help people to train better, more effective, and more efficiently. I think that's very important. We researchers, we don't do a good job as communicators, but I think it's really important to understand the caveats. How should I do 52 weekly sets? Does 12 sets do the work as well? So try to point it out how apply research in practical settings. Again, what we do is applied research. Every research project I started, the question started when we are lifting or reading research about lifting, exercise science, resistance training. And then we need to advance the field, proposing good research designs and answer good questions that are important to people in the applied settings. I think we researchers, we need to do a better job here, but we can talk about that later.
For sure. So it sounds like you think, at least my understanding of that, the reason it's important to understand the caveats is because people who aren't researchers are maybe actually seeing the research and they're not reading the paper, let's be frank. They're just seeing like a meme maybe, or like just a post that's giving the highlights on social media. And typically, if you want to do well on social media, you're making it sound kind of a little bit black and white, a little bit extreme, so it gets the clicks and the likes. And I think you're saying, hey, it's important to know the caveats, because if you are that person on social media digesting this, it could leave you astray. Like, hey, like you said, now it's 52 sets. We should be doing this to maximize growth.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. That's exactly what I meant. Like, I think people see the meme or social media. Sometimes people need to be black and white. Yeah, there's so many nuances, characteristics about studies. We have been doing this for a while and reading. So when I see one data, when we published one data, like the last paper I published was the infamous 52 weekly sets paper, and we did a very good job, in my humble opinion, in the discussion section, pointed out that it seems to a certain point, people should not benefit from extreme high volumes. However, we talk about averages, and every study, when they show the individual responses, we see people responding very, very well, regardless the volume, high, moderate, or low. And again, like, what is when you look at the last study published, absolute change, was that way different from previous study? What about the meaningful effect, or the outcome? Like, is that different from previous study? It is the same. Like, when it comes to being a coach, there's so many variables to consider. Interpreting research is the same. It goes the same way.
I can totally see that. And it's also, like you mentioned, this is one study. What does the rest of the body of literature look like? Has it actually changed anything? Because obviously I had, as you know, Brad, Milo, and Pac on, and we kind of went through the paper, talked about it all. And then the conclusion was like, so recommendations for set volume, have they changed? Like that 10 to 20 practical recommendation that you often hear. No, essentially all of them were like, no, I think that's still, this paper doesn't really change that practical recommendation.
No, I agree. For me, the question at this point is like, and based on, I can share some unpublished findings we have under review now. But for me, is like, it's still very divided whether people need high volume to max out growth, and strength adaptations. So, and again, it goes back to the caveats. Like, we have two studies at this point, like, that they clearly showed an effect that high volume, Schoenfeld 2019 and Brigato 2020 something, I guess. Brigato compared 16, 24, 32 sets. Brad, if you look at lower body, they ended up with a 45 sets, the highest volume group, and they clearly showed an effect. But again, when you look at the outcome, the absolute change is very comparable to studies that used lower volumes. It is like, if you look at the muscle thickness change, again, is similar to studies from my lab with a 12, 18 weekly sets. However, every time you look at individual responses, some people did very well with a high volume. So the NS paper, it shows, again, there was no statistical differences between the groups. And we had a slight advantage, we pointed out, but the uncertainty was limited. We took more conservative approach, because I think, again, at the discussion, we worked that out, information from different papers. But to be honest, and again, like, most of studies, they have a focus on quadriceps. So if you think about can we extrapolate data from 52 sets to biceps, triceps? We can't at this point. And again, I think Brad, the paper from 2019, they counted indirect sets, like they counted compound movements, like a cable row, lateral pull down. I really don't recall exactly exercises, but they counted as direct sets towards the biceps, for example. Then you have a famous paper from Housegrave. I always bad with pronouncing the author's name, but was bicep, and they used direct indirect sets towards the biceps, and they compare 9, 18, 27 weekly sets, trained people. You're talking about trained individuals, and they found no differences. Brigato that found a linear response for lower body when they look at biceps, no differences at all. And again, we talk about, for example, Brad was 30, the highest volume for upper body was 30 weekly sets. The Brigato was 32, and the group that did the most increase for the Housegrave study was the moderate 18 sets. So I really think that most of people should get most of benefits around 10 to 20 sets. Just some people benefit from more or more intensity. And again, it goes back to don't want to be too sciencey here, but every time how many times you read a paper and you ask yourself, oh, nobody trains like that. And that's what you call ecological validity, right? The extent which a paper represents real world. And again, there's a question, maybe not for muscle growth, but do you need the same volume when you train at 90% of 1RM compared to 75? That's another question that I don't have a good answer, especially when it comes to strength, it's a different beast, right? It's more specific. But again, I think that is the issue. Like, I agree that at this point is divided because some papers favored moderate low volumes or no differences between low, moderate, high volumes. Other two papers, they found clear fact. We have a Schoenfeld and Brigato, and we have a Ennis et al., which I'm co-author, that stays pretty much in the middle. A slight advantage, but when you look at actual muscle accrual in centimeters, the 52 sets was 1 point. Just share something. I have a data now. So if you look at absolute muscle thickness change for Ennis, was 1.03, 1.07 centimeters, something like that. The study from my lab with a control group that did not change their previous volume, they got to the lab and they kept their previous volume. We can talk more about that study. In average, they were doing 12 weekly sets, average. Some people are doing more, some people are doing less. But we had the same muscle mass accrual than the group that ended up with a 52 weekly sets. Again, there is a huge individual component when it comes to training volume. How much someone recovers from different volumes, that's, again, I think volume is safe to say that 10, 20 each sets, 12, 25, I think we should, is that worth it going for the double of time to have more centimeters? That's something we need to answer still.
Yeah, it's a really good, several points made. The ecological validity is a really important one there. And it also comes back to your comment on, when I think about it, are all studies made equal? Like, you can even look at a meta-analysis and that's useful, but maybe there's some papers in that are more ecologically valid versus others, maybe some that are better done and ran. Like, you had the 2-week washout period, which I think is relatively novel for these volume studies, but that could be quite important for outcomes. Yeah. Like you said, like you, with your recent study, it sounds like you've actually just taken their baseline volumes, which I think is also an improvement versus, hey, we're just going to, whatever you've been doing, we'll ignore that and just take you down the route of whatever now.
And again, like, why you did that washout period? So, for example, if you go back to, you see how sometimes it's tricky to make like a generalizations from papers. So if we look at Brigato that found 32 sets, group was better than 24, and they both were better than 16 weekly sets. Think about that. So they did a great job. Something need to get better when it comes to exercise science is reporting, transparency, and be more open. And then you can see what those guys were doing before the study. Because when you look at Brigato study, and that's something I always try to account for previous training volume. I know some people got that wrong. They say there is no physiological. We need to point it out whether or not previous training volume is a confounding effect on the actual study. We need more studies to figure that out. But again, going back to Brigato, the 24 and 32 weekly sets, in average, they increased by 50 to 70% their previous training volume. If you look at the 16 weekly set, was the only group that decreased by 25%. Did more volume explain the benefit, or one group decreasing what they were doing before explain the outcomes? You see how it's important to figure out, like, and it's not, again, I know you talk about for a large audience that sometimes don't get so into that, the nuances and the caveats of those studies, but it's the same, like the two groups that increased at most, they were the only two groups that actually increased their previous training volume. The group that was the worst decreased. So, and then, like when you did the all-day study, that we were one of the first to randomize the groups based upon their previous training volume. So when the guys got in the lab, they filled that out, information about their training volume for 2 weeks, and then they figured out how many sets they were doing, and then you randomized based on that, like how many sets they were doing. And we had the 12, 18, and 24 weekly sets. So my goal there was to start everyone with the same baseline. We still had the same issue. People in the 12 weekly sets, they actually decreased their previous training volume, but we didn't find any differences between the three groups. However, when I did an exploratory analysis to look at those who grew muscle at most, the largest hypertrophic effects, those guys who had the best gains, they increasing average 6 sets compared to their previous training volume. With Ennis, the last paper, was like, okay, rather than randomizing based upon previous training volume, let's try to mitigate that effect. Let's do a washout period, decrease everybody, then they're gonna little by little progress all the way to 22 sets, and then everybody starts with a 22 sets. So again, we are trying different ways to, because like I said, I think it's really important when it comes to research design, start the groups very balanced, or just trying to, everybody has the same start line or the same baseline. I think that's really important. If you don't know if something plays a role, we need to account for that regardless. I think that's my mind as a scientist, how it goes. And that, again, we're trying different ways to account for previous training volume. In my most recent study, there was a follow-up for the all-day study. What we did was, all right, one group gonna keep their previous training volume. Average was 12 weekly sets. We have some guys doing like a lot, 40 sets. Some guys doing 6, 8, but average was 12. One group increased by 30% their previous training volume, and the average was almost 20 sets. And the other group increased by 60% their previous training volume, and that was an average of 25 weekly sets. The group that increased at most, like I said, the group that showcased very similar growth compared to Annette's 52 weekly sets, was the control doing an average of 12 weekly sets. So again, is a lot to take if you look the whole. To be honest, I have more questions now when I started studying training volume. I think again, yeah, Annie's paper does not change the recommendation. I think 10 to 20 sets seem to be better than less than 10 sets. And now is concerned about, again, we don't have too much data for different muscle groups. Is that worth it, going above 22, 25, like going all the way 35, all the way 40? Is that worth it for maybe half centimeter more gain? and way more time? That's the main question. I can tell you later the questions I'm gonna try to answer through my research. But that again, we trying at this point. We have a Ennis, we have a Albay in that paper. We tried 3 different ways to account for previous training volume. Yeah, I think that was the reason we did that washout period. Was a lot of work that study, man. Allison, the PI in that paper, was just his master project. And I can't spoil, but we were doing very similar for women.
Oh, nice. Hey, there's
Yeah,
one of the caveats, gender.
That's it, totally. Like it is. I'm working on something on that as well. Like with Professor Clayton Libard from Brazil. Clayton was the senior research in the. Do you remember that paper that increased 20% from previous training volume? Scarpelli. Sure. So is the senior for that paper. We did. I can't spoil, but we did one leg resistance training. And the other leg, we measure muscle thickness throughout 2 menstrual cycles. I can't spoil. We are writing. It was right open here because I need to finish my edits. And Allison, the PI in that paper, is the only thing I can tell you at this point. The women, they didn't go all the way to 52 sets, but we did something similar progression-wise. Progression-wise, okay. We have something with. Yeah, we have a cool stuff about gender to be published soon. So we're excited about that as well.
And did you mention that like one leg was doing one protocol of set volume and the other leg was doing a different set protocol?
Yeah, in that was for the menstrual cycle study, because one bias, right, is like, menstrual cycle change body composition and potentially muscle size hypertrophy in acute fashion. And that would be a confounding factor when women would be undergoing resistance training. What we did was one leg did the resistance training protocol for 8 weeks. The other leg didn't do anything. And we just measure muscle size throughout 2 menstrual cycle, and it's in their phases. We have our hormonal responses, menstrual cycle analysis for muscle cross-sectional area during those menstrual cycle phases, and you're just writing this one. So now is the final round. It should be submitted soon. Addison is writing, because we are about to go to ACSM. He's gonna present that findings for the women, and progression. He's going to present at ACSM. But he called me yesterday like, man, I'm struggling to write because we are writing so many studies about volume. It gets tricky sometimes. Like I really go in circles, like the rat wheel, like I'm doing a lot of effort, stay in the same place. Like, yeah.
I can see that. And I mean, the really cool thing, I guess, we're doing, like, I was thinking about this in terms of one of the other things that can be a caveat is like genetics, as in you see the averages, but there might be some people on here, like I think one of the measurements, or there may have even been more than one on the Ennis paper, where people lost muscle on the 52 sets. It's like, what was happening there? And I don't know, like you said, everyone's got individual differences. Yeah. If one leg or one arm did one protocol and the other side did the other protocol, you take care of that maybe genetic component because it's all in one correct. Individual.
That's the reason. Sometimes, again, we are losing when it comes to ecological validity, because nobody does always unilateral, but we are accounting for something that needs to be accounted in order to understand the effect of training A and B on muscle growth, strength. So again, sometimes we go, that's the reason you pointed out very, very well. Sometimes we go to what you call the intra-subject design to account for the genetic variability that it plays an important role as well. So yeah, that's. But again, it kind of decreases the applicability of the data, because nobody does only unilateral, but those research designs, they're important.
Yeah, that's very true. I can't remember the last time, like for leg training in particular, like when did I last do very much unilateral work and not very often.
Yeah, no, I don't, as I remember, I'm not a big fan of unilateral, because for me, it's always time. Like I like to joke, like the 52 weekly sets study, it doesn't fit my lifestyle at this point. I can't, because the guys were staying pretty much 2 hours by the last 2 weeks. And again, right, like so many, you know that, Stevie, so many people just, 52 weekly sets, but they forgot or they didn't read that people did a washout, slowly progression, started with a 22 sets, and they progressed throughout 12 weeks to get only at the last 2 weeks with a 52 weekly sets. So it is doable. You can do it, but again, and people are like, 52, no way, nobody can do it. That's crazy, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah. I think they also forget, hey, it was just the quads, like, and there was a little bit of like maintenance volume for hamstrings, upper body. I guess who knows? I don't know if have any insights into if people are training their upper body, but it's also their short rest periods as well. And I think I don't know. I think quite a lot of people training for hypertrophy rest longer, maybe because they've seen some of the research that says maybe that's favorable, whereas they're like short rest periods here.
Yeah, was a little longer than, for example, I if I'm not mistaken, I think Schoenfeld 2019 they used 60 seconds training to failure. Brigato, if I'm not mistaken, I think they used something around 90 or 60 seconds training to failure. We use a little longer, but we can say that it might be shorter compared to some people doing hypertrophy training out there. That's another important thing, right? Like we did the 2 R&R, some studies that I think most of studies they are using that, because again, that would be another huge discussion, right? Failure or not failure. So, but again, I think it's fair to say that nobody goes to the gym and perform every set to complete failure. And that was the reason we started to use, because I think the first study was the Housegrave with the biceps 9, 18, 27 weekly sets. They used the 2 R&R, and then we started as well. And again, like I said, if you look at the absolute change in studies with a 2 reps in reserve compared to studies that did out to failure, everything looks very, very similar. But yeah, so that's another important thing to consider.
Yeah, I think it's when you're looking at research, like a lot of people will be able to reflect on like, oh yeah, you shouldn't use like rat studies to necessarily inform how we should eat as a human. But it's similar here, like who are the subjects and what are they actually doing in the gym? Is that similar to what you're doing? Because that's where it can quickly, I think a lot of people are thinking, oh my gosh, like I leg press that many sets, I'd just be completely destroyed. There's no way I could do it. But I think they'd be surprised if, again, it was isolated to quads, you built up to it over time, you were doing the same protocol. You'd be surprised you'd be able to kind of get through that.
Yeah, I think that's very, very nice thing you said. And since I got at UT, was 2014 as a postdoc, and then I started as a faculty here, 2015. Like consider data from the lab and collaboration. I think we probably won the lab that did most studies in trained people in the last few years. Maybe talk about 250 participants. Again, for me, always the like you said, for me, we always have inclusion criteria, like not just train experience. Squat, parallel squat, they need to perform 1.5 times their body mass. Bench, they need to bench 1.2. That's inclusion. If you can't, you're not getting the studies. So every time we do that, in those studies, it surprised me how trained people handle the what we consider no one can do it. They do. I remember we did a study like a 2018. We did we were comparing, and that was reps to failure. Was 2 sessions, like a flat bench, incline bench, 5x10, and we compare superset, pre-exhaustion, forced rep. We to traditional, and we compare acute effects on muscle activation, muscle swelling, and training volume, and perceived exertion and recover. So they did a session one again, was 10 sets to failure, 5 flat bench, 5 incline. They rested for 48 hours. They repeated. So that's what was a cool thing, was a cute study, but you want to see the repeated effect. My thought was, man, performance should go down. We had a trend towards significance to find increase in volume in session number 2. Muscle activation was pretty much the same between. So they handle with just 48 hours in between the sessions. So again, I think people would be surprised how trained individuals, they can handle things we say, yeah, that's not doable. Yeah, they do. I think that's all I learned at most. I've been studying resistance training for 20 something years, but the last, again, since 2015, most of my studies with trained people, they handled. They can do it.
Yeah, and I guess it comes to your question also here, where it's another caveat I have in mind of like length of study. Like, hey, we're only looking over short periods of time. They handle it in that moment, but we're not training just for a week. We're training for months and years, long term. Like, what do we want to do there? And also the thing you pointed out is like, yeah, it might take double the time to get that level of volume that's, yeah, going to provide some more growth, but the diminishing returns, is it then worth it to the general person who's training in the gym just to kind of look better and feel healthier?
That's correct. And again, we cannot generalize paper beyond its population, duration, training modality or training method. We need to be very specific. I think the cool thing after since 2019 with Brad Schofield study, Brad pretty much replicated a study from a colleague, my colleague from Brazil, Regis, was very, but that time Regis, he used like a Brazilian Navy, which they were not resistance trained people, but since Brad's study, we had a way more studies. And again, everybody did the free weight squat. We can compare that. Most people did ultrasound assessment for similar type, a similar device, similar way to analyze image. So now we can look at, we can make that comparison. And I know so many people are working on meta-analysis. We also work on some big data with a volume and use out that previous population because we have access to information that's pretty cool to look at. For example, we finished the point for duration. Even Brad, if you look at the individual responses, some people, I don't think for quads, because he measured VL and rectus femoris, but for upper body, some people lost muscle. For Anna's study was one guy who lost muscle in the 52 sets. What we've extend the training for 4 more weeks, would you see more people losing muscle? Because again, something that's important as well, I think it's a misconcept, not a misconcept. We have you heard of the diminishing returns or the inverted U response. What is the point that you're gonna see the performance going down? We don't know that yet. And I think something that was pretty cool, that maybe the biggest new finding from our paper with Anis was that, hey, you can slowly progress until 52 and you still benefit from that high volume. Was not detrimental. So what is the point that the U makes the turn going down? Now we have, like, before that study was Brad 45. Now we have that one. Average was 37 weekly sets. But again, mostly strength, everybody got stronger. Hypertrophy, everybody got bigger besides one guy. What about duration? Would we observe similar outcomes? Maybe yes, maybe no, but we don't know, right? But I think that was something cool about Anna's paper, that inverted U, we are far away from elucidate or representing what is the point when it comes to weekly sets number that the U makes the turn going down for hypertrophy and strength. And again, those guys were strong. I think that the average And that's another thing I'm concerned in the good way, Steve, is a diminution return, is a diminution returns effect, or stronger people, they're able to train for more loads, and they not necessarily need to go all the way with a high volumes. Why I'm gonna say that? Because again, if you look back at the studies from my lab, we usually have a very strong guys. All base study, the 1RM body mass ratio was twice. So they were able to squat, parallel squat twice. So the last study, the control group, also their average 1RM body mass ratio twice. So they were able to squat twice. The two studies that found hypertrophic benefits with a high volume, Brigato and Schoenfeld, their 1RM body mass ratio was 1.3, 1.4. So they're not strong as the, and Annes was 1.7-ish. So again, that's another thing I'm very intriguing at this point, that we're trying to account for that now. Does your strength, is something you don't have a good data, like does your strength level impact your hypertrophy adaptations down the line? That's something we need to do better. But that's another important caveat. Like to be honest, the participants, when you look at Brigato and Schoenfeld, they were weaker compared to Annes, Albay, and other studies. So that's, you see, man, it's too much, right? I hope I'm not making that too sciencey to you, but
No, it's good. And the inverted U was something I was going to ask you about, because I obviously brought that up, and Brad was like, hey, I still think the inverted U exists. It's just we haven't actually seen it. And it's, so you can't currently, I guess, say it's like an evidence-based kind of fact that there's an inverted U. At the moment, it's a logarithmic curve where it's just like tapering off, and we haven't seen that limit just yet. At least, I guess, evidence-based in terms of studies. I think in practice, maybe as a coach or as a trainee, you've maybe pushed it too far, and you've seen it in yourself.
Yeah, but again, it's really, it goes back to, I agree for Brad there. Like it might be a point that is the friend of mine has an interesting saying that the difference between the poison and the medicine is the dosage. And, you know, even something that's bad in moderate low dosage can produce benefits, right? We know that, right? But there is terminology for that. I just don't recall now. I'm gonna remember. But again, it goes back to how training people, they handle more loads. But for sure, I think there will be a certain point that they can't deal with that anymore, or they might experience injury or decreased performance adaptations. But our study showed somehow that slowly progressing all the way to 52 sets in the 12-week span, no inverted U, no detrimental effect. I agree. I think there will be a point that you can't tolerate that. That's how your body works, right? Like you receive stimulus, it responds, it fights back, it adapts. But we know that too much stimulus might be detrimental. When it comes to volume, we have no clue what the weekly set number looks like. But definitely there is something there. I agree. I agree. There will be a point you make the turn and you get an injury or decrease adaptation and performance.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned really well that, hey, this was in the quads and it was a specialization, and we have to realize that. And so they didn't see it in that circumstance. But if you're training everything, like higher volumes, you're pushing everything. Yeah, it's going to be very tricky, and it's probably going to be different for every muscle too. Like some might be able to tolerate more volume versus others and benefit from more or less than others as well, as you mentioned already.
I agree. Muscle and individuals. And I think, again, I like the specialization thing. I think that that's one way to put it, that, yeah, maybe for a certain period of time, you can emphasize one muscle group. But again, we talk about quads. Should you do the same for triceps, chest? It goes back to the inverted U. I don't know.
And would your, as I guess I'm trying to put a practitioner head on you or a coach's hat, would you, if you were trying to find that point for someone, if you were like taking someone through a specialization phase, would you keep, if they were recovering and performing well, would you keep like slowly increasing the dose until they kind of met that point and think, hey, every increase I'm doing here for this person that's trying to maximize their tricep growth, if I add a set every other week and they're still performing, I'm seeing we should, until we hit like a point where now they're seeing drops off in performance and now we've kind of pushed it too far. We need to recycle maybe.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I haven't been doing coaching for a while, but that's very, very good question, Steve. I like to say there are some remarks when it comes to good training, right? It has progression, monitoring, and testing. I think, again, monitoring, testing, and progression, as long as you're applying those principles, I think the training should work. And then we start to deal with inter-individual differences. But with that being said, because I would for that muscle group or for different muscle groups in the training phase, I would kind of use some exercises as the most important, or not most important, the fingerprint exercises. I would use them for monitoring purpose. And if everything is looking right, as we should be able to progress, and the amount of work performed for those fingerprint exercises should also be increasing. The moment you stop progressing, and also I probably would look at RPE and perceived recovery. If that plateau, if at the moment that the things level off, and then matches with, lately the athletes not feeling recovered, exertion is increasing. Ideally, we should avoid that point. But I would not keep increasing, progressing, because again, progress overload is something very, very misunderstood, because I think people usually assume that just put more weight on the barbell, but you can't just switch exercise range of motion, the same exercise for different range of motion, or different or switch exercises. There are so many ways to keep progressing. Again, our body adapts to so many different stimuli. I don't think it's a good way to progressing always weight on the barbell, but monitoring the core exercises based on your goal, right? Monitoring the core exercises, how those exercise, the volume load, the sets times reps and load, they are progressing across the fingerprints exercises, and always check how perceived recovery, perceived exertion, also how they're going, and again, use more information for decision-making process. Some people might handle for longer if you keep increasing. Some other people might, again, it goes back to my studies where some people did very well with a low volume. Some people did very well with a high volume. So again, I don't think always progressing weight on the barbell is the way to go, or always progressing weak set number is the way to go. Again, different people undergoing the same progression, the same throughout the same time, as we see for NS study, they respond way different. So it is keep tracking how your client athlete, how they're going towards the desired outcome.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
Yeah, I think something you mentioned there, something I like with my clients is because there is big difference in how they perceive the level of work that they're doing. Some people just, I don't know if they're more fast twitch dominant and they just don't need as much because they just generate so much stimulus. Whereas other people, they're like, hey, Steve, I have 10 sets for this muscle group on the week. It barely feels like I've trained it. It's super easy. So maybe they are people where you're like, oh, okay, maybe you can handle a little bit more than this. But I think, as you mentioned, like progressive overload, yeah, it can happen in so many different ways.
So many different ways, right? There are countless ways to do that. So if your goal is hypertrophy, stay on the variables we know they work, right? Volume, it seems to be something really important until a certain point. Proximity to failure and exercise variation. So I would focus on that if my client is concerned about hypertrophy. So many new studies about training muscles at their lengthening position and how that increases muscle growth. But again, something that I like exercise variation. We published the famous study in 2014 that we had one group only doing squat and the other group varying squat, deadlift, leg press, and lunges. And when you look at individual heads of quads, the two groups that varied exercises, they were the only two groups that out of four heads increased. If you go back to the paper, I forgot the authors, but the paper with a seated and prone curve.
Yes.
We all know that overall volume, muscle volume, because they measure the 3 dimensions. Muscle is a 3D structure. They measure the muscle. Now you talk about muscle volume. So overall muscle volume, or let's put it that, muscle growth was better for the seated because the hamstring was stretched, right, in the lengthening position. But when they look at individual muscles, for one muscle, prone was better. So again, it depends. It goes back to monitoring and due progression based on the variables you know that work for a specific goal. Hypertrophy, proximity and proximity to failure is tricky. We can talk a little bit about that. But again, stick to proximity to failure, certain volume number, and exercise selection. I would be more concerned. I would probably apply progress overload through exercise selection rather than more concerned about weight on the barbell, for example. It is, again, and that's because we all talk about, I don't even know that I hate the concept of a junk volume. I don't like at all. And based on data, I think was a study for velocity-based training. They have they stop the set with a 10% velocity loss, 20-something, all the way to 40%, just for giving you an idea, 40% velocity loss is pretty much failure. You probably have a 0 rep in the tank. 10% velocity loss, you probably talk about 5, to be optimistic, 5 R&R. You have 5 reps left in the tank. And guess what? They found growth. They found muscle growth. Even though the set wasn't a hard working set, muscle grew. They had a better results going even more prox to failure, with a 50% velocity loss. But again, muscle can grow even though if you're training a set, like I don't think like only the hard sets work or count towards growth. Muscle doesn't think like that. The muscle doesn't have a brain, but it does not operate in that way that, oh, now that's hard, they're going to start counting for that. It's not like that.
Yeah, junk volume, I guess it comes down to that inverted U again. Like the junk volume would be that right side where you're seeing not diminishing returns, you're seeing worse results from higher volume, where you're doing more work and receiving less reward. Kind of like the dose, the poison is too high.
You have the right side, but have the left side where you're assuming that not a hard enough sets would not count towards growth. It does. Like the study again, does a muscle grow with proximity to failure in the better scenario? Yes, the 50%. But again, if we stop a set for 50% velocity loss, you do more reps within a set, overall more volume, more work. But I think that the right side of the curve, we would be talking about too much volume that would lead to detrimental hypertrophic and strength adaptations. Again, for both, we don't have a good data there yet.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think it was Zach Robinson's meta-regression showed like 10 reps in reserve was even like providing hypertrophy. Yeah, there was exponential as we got close to failure, but it kind of puts into question, I guess you see, depending on the level of training advancement, like if you're untrained, you're going to grow muscle cycling. Like there's studies showing that. I guess proximity to failure probably becomes more important the more advanced you get. At least that seems to be what most people are thinking.
And I think they can gauge better what they have left in the tank and proximity to failure. Again, like we know that when you work with untrained people in the studies, it's funny sometimes. Hey, 0 is nothing at all. 10 is your max, and they're like 11. Come on, we see it's not that hard. Was not that hard, but the bias goes all the way around when it comes to training people. Sometimes we see that's pretty hard. Hey, 0 is nothing at all. 10 is your max RPE, and they give you like a 6. Like, man. All right. And then it's that because usually when you're training, we track barbell velocity, because with barbell velocity, that tells me how hard. So it's something we should do better when it comes to we put every paper we publish, we mention for the testing, for 1RM testing, we always mention but not every training session, but kind of we randomly select people throughout the study intervention to track their barbell velocity to see, are they really 2 reps in reserve? We always do that. And again, cool. I think I'm lucky to have a great students and great trainers. So they are very good trainers. And that's another thing that people, it's funny because the bias out there is like, we don't know how to train people in the lab, or they don't lift, whatever. And you ask like any researcher, ask Brad, Clayton, Libard, ask all those guys, like, what do you hear from our participants quite often during their training sessions? I never train like that. Because we train them hard. And that's another component that the studies, like when you look studies with a supervision and unsupervised training, they show that supervision tend to be better when it comes to the outcomes. And that's a fact. Like I was talking to Brad, I think was during the summer, I was talking to him about, man, we need to find a way to account for the lab effect, because there is an increase in proximity to failure and quality of working sets when people are training the lab. That's what happens. It's not the other way. It's not they get to the lab training easier or lighter. They train harder because we quite often, like I said, we hear from the participants, like, I never trained like that. That's hard. And again, like that lab effect is something that might explain some outcomes as well.
I really like that lab effect. the way I often think about it is in sleep research, and they have people like in this huge get up when they're sleepy and they're studying them, and I'm like, hey, most people aren't sleeping like this. So I like it has that kind of similar effect, like, hey, how applicable is the research then to the individuals? And I think to your point though, where most people are criticizing it because you're not training hard enough, it's actually counter to that. And again, there's research showing that supervision helps people with their results and their training. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And I just wanted to reflect upon some of the points you were making previously. Was I think you're essentially making the point of like, hey, there's an art to programming, and you don't want to like lose sight of everything and how each component, like exercise variation, proximity to failure, volume, they all play into one another. And so you can't just like run down one route and forget the rest. You kind of have to take into consideration everything. It's similar with, again, the proximity to failure research. Yes, training closer to failure led to more growth, but it has to be taken into consideration with the volume research, which also shows a dose response to volume. So it's like, yeah, train as hard as you can with as much as you can. But there's only like, you can only take that so far. You have to kind of choose your poison a little bit, whether or not it's one or the other.
No, yeah, I totally agree. Like there's so many ways to provide the muscles with a good training stimulus. There's so many, and again, like going back to research, I think when it comes to hypertrophy, there's so many unknowns yet. But I think we started to map out the variables, what you should look at. I think their research is helping people at the practical settings to train better and get better results. And again, like performance is like everything in our life. You have a bad and good days, and that day is you're not training that hard. That's fine. You should, right? The good days you compensate. Again, is a trade-off between bad and good days. Overall, as long protein synthesis outweighs protein breakdown, the muscle should grow. But when it comes to strength, that is the thing that we mentioned before we start recording this. For the strength, I think is where the research is not helping, like because most of when it comes to training volume and strength, because again, most of those studies, the primary variable or the primary outcome was muscle hypertrophy. And when it comes to muscle strength, like I like to say, like it's a different beast. Specificity has a huge component. And all those studies, if you get the meta-analysis from Houston from 2017, 18, if you look at those studies, I think only one study, they did like a low rep schemes, but most of studies, the average was 8 to 12. You look at the studies with after that meta-analysis, the studies that we had at this point, is we do like a low rep, but it's not that low, it's 6 to 8, and then you do the high rep day. But again, most of those studies, they also using high rep schemes that if you think about powerlifting, I like to use a study from Mike Zurdos, has a very nice study, a big fan, the famous study they did, they call modified daily undulating periodization. So traditionally, the people do hypertrophy, strength, and power day. And then they did hypertrophy, power, and strength. So they kind of increase the recovery period between the high volume and the highest intensity. So if you look at that study with power lifters, I think they start with, again, they have a deadlift and they have a squat. Just counting sets for the squat, I think they started with 15 weekly sets. They dropped by 40%. They ended up the last two sets with, they ended up the last 2 weeks with 9 weekly sets. But the intensity, they progress every other 2 weeks, like a similar we did for the volume they did for intensity, but they ended up with a 92 or 95% of 1RM. So training volume for, again, every time we manipulate volume towards strength gains, we always are decreasing volume to increase intensity. And those studies, like I said at the beginning, Do you need the same training volume? You train at 90% of your 1 rep max compared to 70? Probably you don't need the same volume, you train at different intensities. So I think that, yes, for hypertrophy, like we said about exercise selection, proximity to failure, 13 weekly set number, we have a better idea. For the strength, I think you have a long way to go. And I like to say, Steve, the powerlifters, they don't need us to get stronger. They figured that out already. We need to do our job better to explain how they get stronger with a better research designs. The bodybuilders don't need us to get bigger. They figured out that already, right? We need to do our research to understand how those things work, how different progressions lead to a specific muscle hypertrophy outcome. Again, hypertrophy research, I think we are getting, especially volume and hypertrophy, I think we're getting better. We only, again, every time you're going to study volume, that's another tricky part. Everything is held constant. All the other training variables, you're only manipulating volume. That's not how people train for the strength. Like, if you go back to the papers from Mike Zordo's, is 6 weeks, pretty short. But what they did, they start off with a 15 weekly set squat, 9 weekly sets deadlift. They ended up with a 40%, something less sets, and intensity way higher. So we need to start having studies with a high, low, so high, moderate, and low volume, utilizing different intensities more towards strength adaptations. So we had something to again, it is a little. We had a study, it is under review now. It's from Allison's work a lot. The guy from the 52 weekly set, he's putting a lot of work for his mentor. So in that study, what we did was very interesting. And again, we need to take other things into consideration because we did an in-season study. We talk about was an American football team in Brazil. Of course, we can't compare American football in Brazil with US, but those guys were highly trained, pretty strong. So in season, we had and then we have a data for bench and squat. In season, we had one group doing 9 weekly sets, 6 and 3 weekly sets. Rep range we used there, 2-4 reps, so pretty heavy, 2 reps in reserve. The findings for the strength, again, way fewer, way less sets compared to NET's 52. And the outcomes were pretty much the same when it comes to strength gains. They gain about 20, I think I wrote down here somewhere, they gained 28 kilos doing 9 weekly sets in season. And NS at all, the paper we published, they gained 27 doing 52 weekly sets. So you see, like and again, we point out, like if people read the paper, we mention those things at a discussion that especially when it comes to strength, the data does not indicate that more is better for the strength. And that's not how people train for the strength as well. So again, hypertrophy, I think we have a better roadmap for strength, especially when it comes to training volume studies on strength adaptations. I think we have a long way to go to provide people with good practical recommendations.
Do you think, so with the obviously similar strength increase, 52 sets versus the 9, do you think it was just down to that specificity of they were training with heavier loads and that was what allowed them to gain that strength versus the 52 sets? I guess the loads weren't quite as heavy. Is it that specificity component of intensity that led to that better result?
I think so. Again, strength. So just so I have an idea, like I have a really, I think I brought, because training volume strength always concerned me. For example, to date, I think specificity, it's kind of something it goes against my argument, or my reasoning, but to date, when it comes to training people, and let's think about training volume studies, the highest strength gains ever reported was from Marshall et al. From 2011, and doing 16 weekly sets. Those guys were quite strong. They compare 4, 8, and 16 weekly sets, and they found 37 kilos. So it was the highest so far, right? So if you look at, let me see, I think Albay, that the study from my lab, the best group, well, when it comes to strength, was the 18 weekly sets. Was like a very, very strong to reach statistical significance. But again, if you just look at absolute change, Albay with 18 sets, they kind of had a 28 kilos. So if you look at, I think was Schoenfeld, the 45 sets group was right here, I wrote down, was about 20 kilos increase. Our control group doing 12 weekly sets, the unpublished data, so the control group that kept the volume, their absolute gain was 32. And again, that effect size is very, very similar. And then we go back to the data I told you with a 9 weekly sets, they gained 28. So you see that, I don't know if it's a diminishing returns or there is no extra benefit for going to such high volumes when it comes to strength, because if you get Marshall, 37, if you got our study with the American football players, 9 weekly sets, 28, Albay, 18 sets, 25 kilos, Ennis, 52, 26. So again, I think strength requires a more specificity, but I always, and another thing that studies, that because I keep telling that we are not helping when it comes to strength. Leg press actually does not transfer to squat strength gains. So you do have a study, I think Brad is even a co-author in that study. They compare leg press only, squat, leg press plus squat. The effect of leg press on squat gains are negligible. Like it was like it does not change at all. So it's the same thing when you talk about counting direct sets for muscle groups. It's the same issue when you look at those studies with the people don't do only. I think only Marshall, they had the people doing only squat, but my studies, Schoenfeld, Ennis, Ostrovsky, which is a very old study, they all compare, they all have like a leg press, knee extension, and squat. So maybe those sets from other exercises would call junk vomit for the squat strength gains because they're not helping at all. Again, I think strength for me, strength gains are more specific than hypertrophy. Hypertrophy, we know that, right? Pick any rep range, go side to failure, muscle you grow. Strength is not that simple. I don't want to simplify. I know so many people, I don't want to simplify hypertrophy, but like I said, the strength is a different beast. And when it comes to training volume, the way you are studying this topic is not the best way to figure out strength gains in response to different weekly set numbers, because the things that I told you. I don't want to make people sad about it, but I think, again, I think that's important to consider.
Yeah, just being honest about the realistic kind of scope of the research right now, and it's really interesting. And to be very clear, when you're reporting strength in those numbers, that's a 1 rep max increase, right? 1
rep max is squat.
Yeah.
1 rep max, free weight squat, very similar way tested. They tested very, very similar. We talk about people here, again, like I said, Schoenfeld and Brigato, their 1 body mass ratio, 1 rep max squat, load divided by body weight. I think Schoenfeld was 1.3, Brigato 1.4. Marshall was 1.7. Albay from my lab was 2 times their body weight. The American football players was 1.70 something, almost 1.8. So again, very, very strong guys with very, very same exercise tested. We talk about squat 1 rep max. But again, like you see that adding sets do not translate to more strength gains. No detrimental effect. That's important to say, right? But
just the plateau.
Yeah, there's a plateau. But again, right? Powerlifters, they don't train the way you are studying volume, right? They don't do that. They never, for example, I have on my high rep days, 12 to 15. That's when the powerlifters do their cardio, right? So
Yes, that's the joke.
You don't do that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm very biased because I'm focused on hypertrophy and bodybuilding, so I'm less concerned that the research is not being super clear yet for powerlifters in terms of set volume. When we're talking about hypertrophy, is there anything else that we haven't spoken about today that you think is important for the listeners to understand when they are looking at research that's coming out?
Yeah, sure. Again, if you look at if you take a broader look at literature, we see that increasing volume, the extra muscle mass accrual, and also the effect size, right? How we measure the magnitude of an effect, they are not so different from studies that used lower volumes. I think volume has a very unique and individual component that we can't make. I always struggle to make. There is one journal I don't want to mention. They have a practical application section. I hate that part because for me, a good training, I forgot to mention another important component for a good training, individualization. That's the key component. And every time you look at studies, if you pull up the individual figure responses, you're going to see people respond very well across the board. And some people also respond bad or badly across the board regards the weekly set number. So again, is that extra? If you think about absolute gains, like I think to date, the greatest gains for hypertrophy, we talk about Schofield. I think the sum of muscle thickness, because he measured VL and Rex femoris, was 1.3 whatever. And then you have Ennis. We have the study from my lab now with a 1 centimeter change, doing 12-week sets in average. So track your training, track your volume, and see how you're responding. I like to say, for some people, training high volume is the good guy. For some people, might be the bad guy. Because don't want to be repetitive, but every time you look individual responses, we see that people respond very well, average, and bad, regardless of the training volume. Maybe you are in that cohort that did very well with a high volume, is fine. But some people don't need, again, it is a genetic, is a fiber type thing. There's so many factors we need to figure it out when it comes to how people respond to different training volumes. But I don't think it's fair to say that, oh, high volume is the way to go for everybody. It might be, maybe, if you think about individual responses, 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6, if you look based on the percentage I see on those studies, most of people average responses. But again, when it comes to use scientific information, don't get, maybe the take-home messages, don't get the last paper published to make decisions about your training program. Look the bigger picture, the other findings, and again, there is no clear benefit of. I'm not saying it's wrong. You enjoy doing high volume, you feel better. Maybe like, hey, the mirror is telling me I'm doing better. When I look myself posing, I'm looking better with a high volume compared when I used to do less volume. For example, increasing work, we do have not training people, but across different populations, the most used or common way to overcome exercise no response is increasing duration and volume.
Yeah.
So again, some people like to train harder when it comes to weight. Some people like to train more with more work, and it's fine as long as the results they meet your expectations. Just like data is not a black or white. Telling the extreme volumes is the way to go. Read the whole paper, please. That's always important. When you like I said, we all have our biases, but most when it comes to a researcher, I think their biases come from observations. Like, again, I have been collecting data for 20 plus years at this point. But I think that's is maybe my take home message.
Yeah.
Like, try again, as long as the training incorporates individualization, progression, testing, and monitoring, it becomes try and error.
You're your own scientific experiment at that point, right?
It is like we did that. Like, sometimes our own experiment is again. I understand the social media, how it works, everything else, but I always need to lean on data. And again, if I look at average 12 weekly sets, 1 centimeter 0.5, and I look and it's with 52 weekly sets, the same muscle mass accrual, 1.03, I guess, if I'm not mistaken. Do I need to go 52 sets? Is that worth it? Again, maybe for a professional bodybuilder, competitive bodybuilder, maybe that makes the difference, and it's fine. But maybe someone, and again, like if you look at all the bodybuilders, like, do they all always train high volume? We know that not every bodybuilder does always high volume. Some do, others don't, and they still all look very big jackets, right? They're huge, and regardless, some are training for high and low volume. I think it's a good way. When you look at bodybuilding, we know that not every bodybuilder trains the same way, same quantity, level of effort, exercise, and you look at the stage, usually they all look, of course, some difference, but size-wise, they look very similar.
I think that's really well said. Like when I look at like the biggest, even natural bodybuilders, like I know their training is very different. And when I reflect upon even people I know in the industry, competitors who, like, I could look at my training program versus theirs, and they could look quite different in many ways, but we both have significant amounts of muscle mass, have over the years progressed really nicely. And for me, at least, it's nice knowing maybe there's many roads to Rome, but maybe your road to Rome is just different to someone else's. Yeah. And that's where that self-experimentation comes in. I think science and people like you, Eduardo, are doing a fantastic job of giving us kind of goalposts to kind of aim at. But it's like, hey, our goal might come from a different kind of direction within this net. And the only way to discover it is, I think, at least with volume, my kind of philosophy is start with the low end, see how you're responding, and then maybe adjust from there. Because like you said, there's individual difference, but as we talked about before as well, like individual muscles also respond very differently too. You might find, quads need barely anything, or maybe they need loads, and you're a sucker like I am.
Yeah, no. And again, like we think about upper body, we have a very, like manipulating weekly sets and upper body. We have a very few studies. We have 3 studies at this point, like the studies that I mentioned, and no clear benefit from 30 weekly sets all the way to 18 weekly sets or 9 weekly sets. Things look very similar. So again, like a training volume for chest, the people train, when they're training, they do bench, they do like a exercise targeting the chest, but usually, I don't know. I get why, because we did an intersect stretching study and we measure muscle thickness for back. Is way harder when you talk about upper lower limbs, but weekly set number for chest grow, I don't recall any study. Hamstrings, I don't recall any study. Triceps, some studies, those studies, I think Brad, Brigato, they measure triceps. But again, like, yeah, I like what you said. We are giving people the references, and not necessarily that should work for everybody. Is your starting point is this, and people respond different. That's yeah. I like what you said, and I agree for that.
Amazing. Eduardo, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great chatting to you. If people want to keep up to date with the research that you're doing, the work that you're doing, where should they head?
I'm more active. So yeah, no, first, thanks for having me. Was really excited. And it was a very nice conversation. I enjoyed to be here and discuss a few things and share a little bit of things I do. I'm more active Twitter, and I think my IG account is more like I share research, but it's a personal whatever. But yeah, I think Twitter and IG, Instagram, like again, are the people can and I don't know, like just those are a good place to find my research.
And ResearchGate might be. I'll also link that one.
Yeah, I was about to say ResearchGate and PubMed. So like,
yes,
ResearchGate is the social media for researchers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, ResearchGate, and PubMed is where we publish our index paper and the things. But yeah, so and reach out. You can find my email at UT website at my university. Reach out, send over an email. I can share data, I can share research. We know that access to papers for general population is not that easy, right? But yeah, this is it. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. And guys, we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
All right, talk later.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality and we know how to do it. And we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut Movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.